don't know. Hey, Marielle, could you let us where's the
Oh,
link to find it so we can see where it is on there?
okay, it's live now.
Tune into. uh, I don't know what I just did. Okay.
Still going?
Hi. Um. Oh, there it is. We're on Facebook. I can see us. Sorry, everyone. We're a little bit late. We were just having some technical difficulties, so I'm not sure who's all on right now. So I just wanted to welcome everyone in Facebook Live Land for this webinar on why ICA declined $150,000 from the Aviva Corporation and the importance of having an Indigenous rights-based approach, not just in the climate movement, but in the broad sector of movements within climate justice, whether it's divestment or fighting individual projects. We need to have a narrative that includes Indigenous rights. So today I've invited Kanahus Manuel with the Secwepemc people and the Tiny House Warriors Project, Clayton Thomas Mueller with 350.org, who's campaigning on a fossil-free Canada campaign, Dallas Goldtooth with the Indigenous Environmental Network that's been working with many Indigenous communities fighting different facets of tar sands pipelines and projects, as well as other projects including the Dakota Access movement in South Dakota. And from across the ocean and the Great Pond, we have Susan Dollywall from the UK Tar Sands Network, who's been working on insurance divestment campaigns. And so I just want to thank everybody who's joining us in Facebook Live Land. Hi, does everyone want to say hello?
Hi.
Hello, Tansy.
So I just wanted to start by starting with a simple, why did we say no? So early last week, ICA received some news that we had won the Aviva Canada Community Legacy Award, which was a $150,000 award through the Aviva Community Fund competition. Now, when we first got the news, we was like, oh my God, we won. But oddly enough, on the very same day, we also found out that Aviva was associated to investments in the KXL pipeline. Well, at least this is what we were told. And then after some careful digging and research and reaching out to our allies, including folks at the UK Tar Sands Network and the Rainforest Action Network, we found out that they were in fact funding and underwriting the Kinder Morgan pipeline, which is a project that is threatening Kanahus's community as well as many other communities in British Columbia and parts of Alberta. Now, I come from the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, which is a tar sands impacted community. So I felt completely like, oh my God, this company is investing in the abrogation and destruction of my community and so many other communities that are fighting tar sands pipelines. So after some research, we found out that it wasn't just TransCanada or Kinder Morgan, but it included projects like Teck Resources Limited, which is proposed the largest ever open pit tar sands mine in northern Alberta, 17 kilometers from the boundary of my First Nation, 27 kilometers from the boundary of a UNESCO World Heritage Site as well. In addition to that tar sands developing company, there was also investments in Encana, Exxon, Imperial, Suncor, Chevron, Cenovus, and of course Kinder Morgan, TransCanada, and Enbridge. So this has far-reaching implications, and it wasn't some small amount of dollars either. We're talking about $500 million are held in their index funds in what are called passive investments in these corporations. They hold millions of stocks in all of these corporations, and we could not, in good conscience or in good faith, accept money from a corporation that had this much money, this much investments in corporations and companies that were complicit in the violation of Indigenous people's rights, the erosion of the environment, and contributing massively to global climate change. So for those of you that don't know, the Alberta tar sands is Canada's single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions and the only sector that's actually growing their greenhouse gas emissions rather than declining. So it goes against all the morals and beliefs that Indigenous climate action has ever that, like, I mean, that's the whole mandate of our organization, is to support communities challenging the drivers of climate change, to increase climate change literacy, to support Indigenous-led climate actions and strategies. So we couldn't, in good faith, do that. It wasn't an easy decision. Clayton Thomas Mueller is on our executive and our steering committee. We had many conversations with them on what we should do once we found all this information, and we made the decision as a collective not to move forward and accept the money. So that is kind of the gist of it. But the reality is it wasn't just about not accepting the money, but we wanted to make sure that those that are fighting these projects has a voice. And so that's why we're hosting this sort of live chat and webinar with some of these great people today that are a part of a lot of these projects, either in the divestment movement or challenging the individual projects. Yeah, so that's to start off with. And I wanted to start by welcoming Kanahus to start off with, to talk to us a little bit more about what's happening in the Secwepemc territory and what you guys are doing in the fight against Kinder Morgan right now. Oh, she's muted still. Can we unmute her?
Could you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay. Waika to everybody. My name is Kanahus Freedom Manuel, and I'm right now in unceded Secwepemc territory. We're now Trans Mountain through 118 kilometers of our territory. This is our territory. There is no treaties here, and there is no consent for this pipeline to go through. We had a historical gathering this past to give our opposition to Kinder Morgan, and we said no consent for this pipeline to come. Actually, not allowing the passage to. It's important for everybody to know that we don't only give no consent to Kinder Morgan, but also to Canada and to British Columbia, to Trudeau and to the National Energy Board. The permits that are being forced by the city of Burnaby right now to begin construction or clearing of the trees, that the NEB has now approved a permit. This is not with the consent of the Secwepemc people. Sorry, my lights went off. But one of the things that we're doing right now is we're building 10 tiny houses, and you could sort of see them outside right now. I'm just going to go out here for a little bit, and you can see the tiny houses. They're being built right there. Some big tiny houses. They're all going to be solarized. We're building 10 of them to be placed directly on the path of the Trans Mountain pipeline. So we're asking everybody to stay tuned and stay updated. But one of the things when we're talking about divestment and everything, and talking about that these corporations don't have consent to go through our territories, we're also talking about Canada and the Canadian government and the National Energy Board, that they don't have consent of Indigenous people to also approve these permits that they're eventually going to be pressured to push through. Our salmon is one of the most important food sources of our people here in so-called British Columbia. Indigenous peoples all the way from the interior, all the way to the Salish Seas, depend on that salmon. And there's going to be irreversible harm and damage to our waterways if this pipeline goes through. We heard it from our relatives all around Turtle Island, that wherever there's pipelines, there's spills. And we're not willing to take that risk with our land, with our culture, with our language, with everything that is based off of our lands. And so I stand in solidarity with everybody that's protesting and opposing the Kinder Morgan pipeline, but also all the pipelines that are coming from the Alberta tar sands. And my heart goes out and my prayers go out to all of our relatives in the northern parts that are impacted by the tar sands. We're not going to leave you to fight this struggle and this big fight alone. We're going to stand there, and we're connecting our struggles by these tiny houses that we're going to put all the way to the northern part of our territory that's not that far from the Alberta tar sands.
Thank you, Kanahus. Thank you so much. I mean, this is exactly why ICA couldn't accept the money. When you have these amazing people that are challenging these crazy and immense projects that are responsible for the violation of Indigenous peoples' rights, it becomes a no-brainer that it's time for us to not take this type of dirty money. It's time for us to actually look at where this money is coming from and making sure that we're not being complicit in the violation of Indigenous rights, the erosion of the environment, and contributing to global climate change. It's not an easy decision for small organizations, but when we make steps like this, we're not just supporting these communities, but we're signaling to the world that change needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. So thank you so much, Kanahus, for sharing that. We're going to share links to the Tiny House Warrior projects. We encourage you to take a look at their website and support them in any way you can. You know, this is a grassroots project, and they are constantly accepting donations. And we should be supporting projects like this and making sure that our dollars aren't getting invested in Kinder Morgan, but that we're investing our money in projects that are ensuring the protection of lands, waterways, and Indigenous communities. So thanks, Kanahus. The next person I want to call on is Clayton Thomas Mueller. If you could tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you're working on with 350 and really the importance generally of why it's so important to have Indigenous rights included in these conversations around challenging not just tar sands, but investments in tar sands.
Yeah, for sure. I want to say hello to all the listeners, viewers that are tuned in on Facebook and here on Blue Jeans. Big shout out of respect to my fellow allied campaigners that are here presenting as part of this Indigenous Climate Action webinar. And a shout out to our ancestors who are always with us and supporting and guiding our work. Bonjour, danse, songibini, siyanene, tishnakas, kinutotem. My name is Clayton Thomas Mueller, and I'm the Stop It at the Source campaigner with the global climate organization 350.org. I'm based in Treaty 1 territory here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, literally the geographical center of Turtle Island, according to longitude and latitudinal lines. Yeah, you know, I am completely inspired by the behavior that Indigenous climate action is modeling to civil society, to social movements, as far as the rejection of this incredibly lucrative $150,000 grant. You know, this is money that ICA could have used, but because of the moral considerations around taking money that's been derived from fossil fuel companies that are violating the rights of Indigenous peoples in the places here in Canada where they're operating. On top of that, humanity the world over, in terms of the climate change that these types of developments are driving. You know, I raise my hands up to the women that are leading the Indigenous Climate Action Initiative, you know, for having the bravery and the moral authority to reject this prize. Aviva and their parent corporation are invested in just about every single energy transport and energy extractive company that's operating in and around Canada's tar sands. I think that the two projects that 350 has been mostly involved in supporting local resistance to has been, of course, the Kinder Morgan campaign that the Manuel family and Secwepemc, as well as members of their nation, have been resisting in the interior, as well as coastal Salish communities, including families like the George family from Tsleil-Waututh Nation. They've been resisting, on the water, on the coastal area. 350.org has been, supporting that work, but also, supporting a strong Stop It at the Source narrative in all of these pipeline fights, not just Kinder Morgan, but Keystone XL, Line 3, the Enbridge pipeline that Honor the Earth is fighting in Wisconsin and Minnesota in support of the Makwa camp. All of these pipelines come from one place, and that's Canada's tar sands. And, as our allies on the ground are fighting these pieces of infrastructure, we're also supporting in stopping the tar sands at the source, And one of the ways that we've been doing that is targeting the Vancouver-based Canadian coal mining company known as Tech Frontier Resources. They have decided to take a gamble and enter into Canada's tar sands. They have applied for a project called the Tech Mine, which would be as large as all of the existing surface mining operations in Canada's tar sands combined. This proposal is so massive, so staggeringly huge, that it would require its own dedicated tailings pond. There's already 12 tailings ponds in Canada's tar sands. You can see these things from outer space, and if Teck is successful in their application, they will have a tailings pond just for their one mine, which would be as big as all of the other surface mines combined. I think the most important thing to understand about this investment that Aviva has in both Kinder Morgan and Teck, it's in the tens of millions, if not more. It's not just a little bit involved. They are right involved, right invested in these destructive projects that do not have the consent of local communities. The Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, who Executive Director Ariel Duranger comes from, has drawn a line across a river in Alberta called the Firebag River, where development is not allowed to happen past, and Teck Frontier is proposing to build this massive tar sands mine just kilometers away across Lake Athabasca from the community of Fort Chippewa and Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, right on a UNESCO World Heritage Site known as the Athabasca Delta. It's the second largest freshwater delta on the planet. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's the place where local First Nations have been hunting, trapping, fishing for millennia, and we've got to do everything that we can to stop it. So, for us at 350, we're very committed globally, to the global divestment movement. Insurance companies, just like banks, just like investment management firms, have a huge economic footprint in global markets. Their investments as institutional shareholders in these transnational oil corporations and energy transport corporations are a moral issue. They don't have the right to invest in the global climate crisis. They don't have a right to invest in human rights violations, indigenous rights violations, and we have to hold them to account. Aviva PLC will have you believe that they've got internal structures that they say that we don't actually own these shares, we just manage them for our clients. Banks have similar safeguard mechanisms to allow them to say that, we're not profiting off the climate crisis. A lot of these major financial management mechanisms, investment mechanisms, have these safeguards that protect them from activists and organizers and community leaders like the ones that are talking to you on today's webinar, to protect them from our criticism. And so, don't believe the hype. Aviva PLC and all of its children, all of its companies like Aviva Canada are a part of the problem. And they need to be challenged to divest right now, not just from Canada's tar sands, but from the entire fossil fuel sector. Science tells us that we have years to get off of fossil fuel, to turn off the tap. We just had the Paris Climate Accord, which most countries, except for the United States, have committed to. The entire world has ratified and adopted the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so, as Kanahus mentioned, Kinder Morgan, Tech Frontier Resources, they do not have the free, prior, and informed consent of locally affected communities, and we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with these communities and get this company, this insurance company, to divest. Thank you.
Thanks, Clayton. Clayton touched on some really important things. That the tar sands is a giant beast. I come from a community, the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, and this is a project that my nation has basically decided is the line. Like, this project can't happen. It cannot cross the line in our territory. We've created this sort of safe zone where we can't have projects, and it's anything north of what's known as the Firebag River. And this project is north of the Firebag River, and really threatens all of the things that Clayton talked about. And what's even scarier is that this project is actually a feeder to the Kinder Morgan pipeline that Kanahus's community is challenging. So our struggles are all connected not just by a common issue around the violation of our rights as Indigenous peoples, but we're actually connected by the very oil and sources that are getting pumped through these pipelines and the infrastructure that's being built. And Aviva, again, having massive investments, needs to understand and know that we can't accept this as the status quo, and that we have to be responsible. If you want to be a responsible investor, don't invest in projects that violate our rights. So our next speaker that we've invited is actually from the UK. Suzanne Dollywell with the UK Tar Sands Network has been working with working in the divestment sector in the UK, looking at a lot of these companies and their investments in the fossil fuel sector. And Aviva has been one of the corporations that's sort of been in their line sight of companies that they're targeting. And I'd love Sue to share about some of the experiences they've had already with the divestment movement in the UK and where Aviva sort of stands in the mix of all of this. So Sue with the UK Tar Sands Network, thanks. And also Sue is a longtime friend and ally who has been so supportive of the Indigenous rights movement and has also facilitated many, many, many tours of Indigenous peoples to come to shareholder meetings, to meet with banks and government representatives in the EU and the UK to talk about the importance of including Indigenous rights within whether it's trade and economy to transport and import tar sands oil into the UK and the EU, or financing it through pension funds or through shareholder activism with multiple different companies. So I just want to applaud Sue for the tremendous work that she's done over the years and continues to do on the other side of the planet. Thanks, Sue. Can't hear you.
Thanks, Ariel. Thanks for that introduction. And it's been an incredible 10 years of working with you, Nili. And so I just wanted to, like you mentioned, bring some of the context into where this divestment decision lies. As you've mentioned, the work that we've been doing in the UK and the EU has been part of this larger Stop It at the Source narrative. So when we're talking about stopping at the source, we're talking about ensuring that, as well as the pipeline fights, we're continually keeping our eyes on Alberta and at the communities most impacted there. It also means tracking the financing and investments that are coming from Europe. Because, as many of you know, a lot of the corporate power, a lot of the banking and financial power, which is driving Canadian corporations in Canada and globally, and the multinationals who are pushing forward on Indigenous lands are coming from here. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing and targeting corporations has been about showing the risk and the risk that is associated with these projects on a various number of standpoints. That's from a climate perspective, from an environmental perspective, a water risk perspective. The thing that we've tried to shine a light on most is the risk associated with environmental risk, Indigenous resistance to these projects. So that comes in multiple forms. That comes in the form of the legal resistance that's brought by Indigenous peoples because of their sovereign rights, which is very different from fighting for human rights or diversity rights. Those Indigenous rights are sovereignty rights. So we've been trying to make sure the shareholders understand the specific unique rights that Indigenous peoples hold when they're opposing projects, and how that translates into financial risk. And that's been one of the main ways that we've been pushing corporations like BP and Shell to eventually pull out of the tar sands. So that language around FPIC, free, prior and informed consent, is very essential to what has given the divestment movement its momentum that you see now. And another thing that means for us with stopping at the source is acknowledging the privilege and the power that comes with being people of colour in Europe, and that essential role that we play in that decolonisation struggle to challenge the corporations and the governments here. So as I mentioned, for the past 10 years, we've been pushing on the banks, the governments and the corporations who have been investing here. And with it moving into the insurance market, it's kind of a shift for us, because as well as targeting the investments and the assets that these insurance companies are holding in these projects, we're also trying to push insurance companies away from underwriting new projects. And that's kind of the new twist that is in this. And so we've seen that partners such as Unfriend Coal, who've been leading a lot of the insurance work on this, have pushed many insurance giants such as AXA and SCOR recently to actually change their policies in terms of underwriting. And this is the other side of the balance sheet. So making sure that, we're pushing insurers or underwriting projects that are devastating communities and climate change, are making policies for that. So, most recently, Lloyd's, a large insurance house in the UK, actually divested from coal, and we're seeing that in the next AGM season, we're going to be seeing a lot of policies coming from insurers who are stopping the underwriting of new coal. So with Aviva and this incredible, powerful decision by Indigenous Climate Action to refuse this project, we're also putting tar sands on the radar for insurance companies, that they need to be looking at the real risk associated with these projects. And now the difference between oil companies and energy companies and insurance companies is that the insurance industry has acknowledged climate change. Since the 70s, they've got a operating understanding, a philosophical awareness of climate change. So within the insurance industry themselves, they acknowledge climate change. And so the decision that ICA has made to refuse this project and to shine a light on their tar sands investment, incredible. And I hope it's going to skyrocket and snowball this push to stop their investments. Because while Aviva has made a big song and dance about pulling out of coal and moving into renewable energy, that cannot happen, and that cannot signal real climate action with also pulling out of their investments from the tar sands and also no longer providing underwriting for new projects. So I hope people can, get involved, keep in touch with what's happening, and as we find ways to put pressure on the insurance industry. And as I mentioned, there's a real understanding in the insurance world about the real risks associated with climate change. And so I think it's a really powerful, exciting space that we can continue doing this solidarity campaigning. That's it.
Thank you, Sue. It's so great to have a voice from someone who's deep into this stuff, because honestly, a lot of our decision to not accept this money came from some really great advice and a lot of sort of conferring back and forth with groups like Sue with the UK Tar Sands Network and Unfriend Coal, as well as the Rainforest Action Network, to talk about what does a passive investment mean? And we're not a campaigning organization. That's one thing that I want to make clear. Indigenous Climate Action didn't do this because we wanted to start a campaign against Aviva, but rather this was a moral decision based on the fact that we recognize that this is a huge amount of money that could really help our organization take off. But when we found out where their money was being invested, and it's not Aviva Canada, it's Aviva PLC, their parent company, which is based out of the UK, which is why we have folks like Sue on this call. But it's still the same company. Aviva is the parent company. Aviva PLC is the parent company to Aviva Canada, which makes it really, really critical that we look at how we can get this money moving away from these types of investments. And we have to take a stand, because if we don't take a stand and we just turn a blind eye to this, these type of investments would never change. And we're hoping, again, that this signals and this opens the opportunity for Aviva to sit down with groups like Unfriend Coal, like Sue Dollywall in the UK, to talk about ways that it could actually divest from fossil fuels wholly and not just focus on coal. I do want to just throw out there that Canada has done a huge, a very similar position where they're making huge commitments to phase out of coal, and yet no commitments to phase out of tar sands. So all of the tar sands currently and the plans to expand the tar sands, which are currently on the table, actually surpass everything that they're going to plan to phase out of coal in the country. These types of sort of distraction and distract you from the actual real issues is what's happening in companies like Aviva, but also by governments like Canada that are saying, look, we're going to phase out of coal. we're going to put all this money into renewable energy, but all of those activities and actions don't make up for the fact that these projects are actually creating more emissions and violating and continuing to violate the rights of Indigenous people as they have done so for the last 60 years. So we have to talk about climate justice, not just about climate stabilization, but climate justice. And climate justice is the inclusion of Indigenous people's rights. And the last speaker that we've invited here today is no stranger to this narrative, and it's Dallas Goldtooth with the Indigenous Environmental Network, who has tremendous experience in pushing the Indigenous rights-based narrative within the environmental justice movement. And I just wanted to invite Dallas Goldtooth, a longtime friend and ally from, you're out of Chicago today?
Yes.
Well, and he's from Chicago, so thanks.
My name is Dallas Goldtooth. I'm a campaigner, Keep It in the Ground campaigner with the Indigenous Environmental Network. And first and foremost, I want to applaud Indigenous Climate Action and the leadership there for making this tremendous and very, very difficult decision. I mean, $150,000 is no chump change. That is a significant amount of money, especially for an organization that is just getting its feet and really wanted to start creating some significant change within Canada and within the climate justice movement there. And, you know, this decision, it's as difficult as it is, it's, as Ariel said, is based on moral grounds, on ethical grounds. The Indigenous Environmental Network, the organization I work for, has been actively fighting against the Keystone XL pipeline, which is owned by TransCanada, a Canadian corporation. In that pipeline, the Keystone XL pipeline is proposed to carry tar sands oil from Alberta and to be transported down to the Gulf Coast of the United States. So I think people should really definitely understand the conundrum that ICA was put in when they realized that, you know, that they support this fight the fight against Keystone XL, but so they couldn't take money from a corporation that was funding the oil to come through our territories. You know, the struggle against TransCanada, against Keystone XL, has been ongoing, and down in the States, we've come to call it the zombie pipeline because it keeps coming back from the dead, and now we're in the last legs of this struggle, and we firmly believe that we're going to stop this pipeline from crossing not only the lands of my people, the Oceti, Sakowin, Oyate, but we're also going to stop it from crossing other people's lands, and not just for our benefit. That's the key thing. It's not just about this one pipeline. It's not about this whole keep it out of my backyard approach. It's a holistic vision that we're doing it not just for us, but also to benefit and help support those relatives at the source in the tar sands region, the Cree, the Dene, the Métis communities, who have time after time told us about the impacts that this development is happening on their lands, to their people, to their water, to their animals, and how it is a complete disregard for their Indigenous rights. And so I think that we're in this amazing moment right now where you have this holistic vision, this kind of movement that's looking beyond just the localized impacts of these projects on local territories, but looking at how these projects impact the global community overall, how these projects impact Mother Earth overall, and how it's making it a future less livable for all life on this planet at this moment. And it's not just about the fights on the ground. That's the part about this that's beautiful about this movement, is that it's not just those that are standing and holding space or people actively campaigning, but the movement has now expanded to the financial sector. And now what we're seeing here is the movement's expanding to the insurance sector to really create this shift in an economic paradigm away from this extractive belief that we have to continuously extract from our communities, from our land, from our very souls to benefit only a handful of people or towns or nations or whatever it may be. And that's where we're at right now. This divestment movement that we're seeing that was really reinvigorated with the fight against Dakota Access Pipeline, where we saw so far we've seen over $4.3 billion out of city investments move out of funding Dakota Access Pipeline and fossil fuels. We've seen over $85 million of personal investments moved out of fossil fuels. And now with this hope and with this effort right now and highlighting companies like Aviva and other companies is really shining a light saying, how can the insurance sector now take the correct steps to divest themselves from fossil fuel. And it's a holistic approach, and everyone's a part of this fight. You know, those are our communities of the Oceti Sakowin. Remember strongly the things that we saw in the fight against Dakota Access Pipeline, and a lot of our relatives on this video were there with us at times as well. And we don't forget, but we also remember that it's much bigger than just one fight. It's much bigger than just one pipeline. We're doing this for all 7 generations and for all creation on this planet. So again, you know, from our organization to our sister organization up north, the Indigenous Climate Action, this is just something really powerful, and I really just recognize the female leadership there at ICA for doing an amazing job and setting the tone right out the gate about what it means to be solid partners, solid allies, and just good peoples. So that's my piece on it. No KXL, shut down the tar sands, no KM. We stand in unity all across the world.
Thank you, Dallas. Thank you so much for your kind words and support. You know, that's one of the things is that Indigenous Climate Action, it just happened. And I think that it happened really organically, but it's a team of amazing Indigenous women, and we are a remote team. So we have staff in Victoria, Vancouver, Haida Gwaii, Toronto, and Ottawa, as well as myself here in Edmonton and Treaty 6 territory. And, you know, we're all a part of this movement. We've all been longtime folks that are working to inspire and be a part of the Indigenous rights movement. And it's just been so amazing. But, you know, there's a really interesting sort of prophecy that was told. You know, we always hear about the 7th generation that will come to restore balance. You know, maybe not all of us have heard it, but there's a prophecy that in 7 generations, the 7th generation will rise and will restore balance to our people and bring us back to our rightful places as leaders here. And part of that is this restoration of balance is also about the restoration of the masculine and the feminine, the balance between those two. And it's been really, really incredible to work with such a powerful team of women and see so many women rise up and just really be a part of this movement of women rising and this rematriation of who we are as Indigenous women. So we have a question from Sina Brown Davis. She asks, what solidarity do you need from other Indigenous peoples? And I don't know if there's anyone from the group that wants to take that. As far as ICA is concerned, we're just looking to support other communities. We're a capacity building organization. We do have a crowdfund. I put it in the chat for the live Facebook live chat. For the video, but you can take a look at that. For us, we're just looking to support other folks. So if any of the folks on the call want to talk about what they need for solidarity from other people, and I know Sina, she's calling all the way from New Zealand or Atuera. So is there anything that other Indigenous people can do to support you?
I can answer. I'll answer for my part. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. So right now, the fight against Keystone XL, we're asking folks who are committed to support frontline communities in South Dakota, Nebraska, Montana, that to sign a promise to protect. It's you can go to nokxlpromise.org. That's nokxlpromise.org. And effectively, what it is that you're making a pledge that should it happen, should it come down to that, and should the local communities decide, we're doing a call out for people to come to our homelands, to our territories, to stand in solidarity, to hold space and take creative resistance to stop this project, to make sure that, to delay this project as long as possible. And we're asking folks to do this in a very heartfelt way, in a very thoughtful way, in a very principled way, to take action and do some beautiful creative resistance at the behest in the direction of local communities, native and non-native. So that's one thing we're asking folks in preparation in this fight. We're gearing up and against the Keystone XL pipeline. So that's nokxlpromise.org.
Yeah, this is Clayton from 350. One important way, I just posted in the Facebook live chat, but if people could, go to gofossilfree.org/Canada and sign the petition that we've launched to add an Indigenous rights review and a climate test at the federal level for the Tech Frontier mine application. At some point in the next year, the application that Tech Frontier Resources has put forward to the provincial government of Alberta will have to receive federal approval from climate czar Catherine McKenna and, of course, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And we really need to put the pressure on them. So if you go to gofossilfree.org /Canada, you will see the petition that exists there right now. We need to get as many signatures as possible, and stay in touch with @350 Canada. We're going to be organizing on the tech issue, nationalizing this issue as we move towards 2019, which is the federal election year here in Canada and the end of the first term of this Liberal government, which has been going all in on Canadian tar sands. We need to make this issue a national issue before the federal election year hits. So, maintain contact with me at Cree Clayton on Twitter. Follow us on the 350 Canada Twitter account and also on Facebook. And please do sign the petition. I'll post it again on the Facebook live chat.
Thanks, Clayton. It looks like Kanahus has jumped off here, but I did want to put out another shout out. The Tiny House Warrior Project, for you, those of you that might not know what it is, they're building these tiny houses that are being powered by solar in the route of the proposed Trans Mountain pipeline, which is being proposed by Kinder Morgan. And this is a massive pipeline that would destroy over 800,000 square kilometers of unceded territory in the region. It would go through the territory of 800,000 kilometers of the Secwepemc people and other First Nations in the region. And it's really, really critical that they get support. They are a very grassroots organization. They're always looking for support in building their homes, getting the word out there. I encourage you to take a look at it. tinyhousewarriors.com. Check it out. I also encourage you to follow Kanahus Manuel on Facebook and Twitter. She's always got really exciting and amazing things that she's up to in the fight to protect the lands and territory of her people, and not just against Kinder Morgan, but many other projects that are threatening our lands and territories. And I think that that's the overlying message to a lot of us, is that these issues aren't just in tar sands. I mean, the Dakota Access Pipeline was not a tar sands pipeline, but it was a Bakken oil pipeline. This is about divesting from fossil fuels. This is about talking about the drivers of climate change and those that are most impacted, both by the drivers of climate change and climate change itself. And that's Indigenous communities and those that are land-based peoples. We have to ensure that when we're talking about building the solutions for tomorrow, that our rights are included, that they're upheld, and that we have a place at the table in making decisions of how new economies are built, how new communities are built, how our new energy systems and paradigms will not just include us, but ensure that we are equals and that we achieve real equity in this country. I guess we have one other question from Kevin. Oh, do you want to say something, Dallas?
No.
No? Okay. Kevin Christmas asks, what impact would a green economy have at the community level to counter declaration of losses from industry? I could actually speak to that a little bit from my own community, because I come from a tar sands community. So what kind of impact would a green economy have at the community level? Well, as Indigenous peoples, there's a kind of a misnomer. There's a belief that we are benefiting tremendously from the oil and gas sector, particularly tar sands oil. And while that's true to some degree, it's not a broad-based reality. The reality is we don't receive royalties from these sectors. So the governments receive royalty both at the provincial and federal levels, but First Nations don't receive any direct royalties. And in fact, funding through INAC, or Indian Northern Affairs Canada, has not actually increased substantially at the same level that tar sands profits have. So we're not seeing those actual direct impacts from financially unless we enter into business agreements, unless we enter into what are called impact benefit agreements. So what does the green economy actually do? The green economy for our communities could create localized, regional jobs that we're a part of developing, rather than jobs that we are basically taking because there's no other jobs in the region right now. By creating these energy sovereignty, economic sovereignty in the green economy sector, we're actually creating more ability for us to have a choice in how things are moving forward. There are many of my family members and many people in my community that are employed in the oil and gas sector, and it's because it's the only place that there is really good employment. So we are essentially being held as economic hostages, and the green economy offers us an alternative route to having to continue to participate in the very economy that's responsible for destroying our rights and the survival of our culture. So I think that there's tremendous and huge opportunities, not just for addressing and mitigating climate change, but for developing new economic sources that uphold and affirm and support the survival of our rights and culture as Indigenous peoples on the ground. But we need to ensure that we are the ones. Someone, Clayton, you need to mute your thing. I'm getting feedback. It's okay. Someone got it. No, you're not. You need there. But we need to be included in the development of those things. We can't continue to have the new green economy prescribed to us. We need to have a seat at the table in determining what the green economy looks like. We can't just be talking about handing the power of, let's say Enbridge, which has huge holdings in renewable energy, from Enbridge being a pipeline company to being a renewable energy company, and then telling us those jobs that we need to become a part of. We need to be a part of developing our own strategies. And then we'll see real changes and real economic justice and climate justice for all.
Yeah, a couple of words on the topic of, economic transition and just transition. As Ariel mentioned, it's not the story of her community is the story of all northern Indigenous communities. I think all of the Athabasca First Nations that come from the region where the majority of tar sands is extracted, or in and around the city of Fort McMurray, northern Alberta, have 86% of the revenues going into their communities derived directly from tar sands contracts. And, this is highly problematic when we think about the scientific, economic, and justice imperative to stop the expansion of the tar sands. We need to come up with realistic goals as far as making sure that we're retraining both native and non-native workers involved in the sector to have high-paying local trades that they can transition into, such as building wind power, building solar photovoltaic energy, battery storage, or whatever the mix is. And here in Canada, we've got a big problem with the federal government because they continue to paint Canada as a leader globally in renewable energy because of our vast network of mega hydroelectric dams. Meanwhile, in Canada's own federal Canadian Climate Action Plan, on the last pages, it stipulates that Canada's highest source of renegade emissions doesn't come from the oil sands. It actually comes from their vast hydroelectric reservoirs. And so, there's a lot of false solutions that the Trudeau government is investing in and pushing on a global stage, including mega hydro development, which are actually counterintuitive to real action on climate change. And so, involved in all of this mix, whether it's forest offsets, mega hydro development, if we let the corporations influence how Canada sets its climate policy, it's going to continue to sacrifice Indigenous communities at the altar of irresponsible policy. And so, absolutely, locally driven economic transition initiatives controlled under the guise of tribal sovereignty, of First Nation sovereignty, are absolutely essential to building models of economic transitions that are just for people who have historically paid the price and been sacrificed as a result of Canada's energy policy.
Thanks, Clay. Dallas, did you want to add anything or?
I have to get going here shortly. I think I'm just really amplifying the amazing words that Clayton and both area you both shared. I think that's just my little 2 bits is that it's more than just reevaluating our energy systems. It's also reevaluating, as Clayton referenced, our food systems, our housing systems. That as we're having a solid conversation about transitioning ourselves to a better, more sustainable society in a justly manner, that we are also paying attention to all these different ways that keep us from connecting with each other and keeping us from connecting to Mother Earth in an equitable way. And I really, really look forward to the models that are being developed, and I'm looking forward to the work and tremendous work that the Indigenous Climate Action Organization is going to be doing to really evaluate what are those models look like in Canada, what are the ways that First Nations communities are leading the way in climate justice and social justice, and how can we amplify those efforts. So thank you very much to the Indigenous Climate Action for giving us this opportunity to speak here and just keep kicking butt. You guys are doing amazing.
Thanks, Dallas, and thanks for joining us today. And Sue Dollywell from the UK wanted to add some more to this as well. So, Sue?
Yeah, I just wanted to say again, thank you as well to ICA for showing this leadership. And I think constantly for Indigenous peoples bringing that holistic vision to the divestment work that's been happening, because as well as pulling those dollars and that money away from the fossil fuel infrastructure, we need to be thinking about that transition. And often, we just see campaigns that are focused on divesting, but what does that mean for the reinvestment? So especially with this piece around Viva, I think it's been great that ICA has been able to shine a light on the fact that we can't just go after coal, we can't have any sacrificed communities, and so we need to be twinning those efforts to also be, like I said, both pulling away the divestment, but the important key part of this insurance work is to also stop the underwriting of new projects. And that's where we can see the momentum, because many of us have been working for a decade now in the divestment work. So this shifting towards this stopping new projects is also a part of this holistic vision that we have. So I think, that's my last point. I want to just thank ICA for the leadership and the vision that you bring to the divestment work that we do.
Thank you, everybody that was a part of the webinar today to talk about the importance of, also this is an important conversation just to be cognizant of where money's coming from. There's really a scarcity of funding for a lot of the work that we do, and we have to be careful, because where we take our money from sends a signal to the industry of what's okay and what's not okay. And I know that it's difficult, but if we put pressure on these foundations and corporations that are giving out money to not be associated with the very projects that are violating our rights, that we're building these amazing new initiatives, whether it's the Tiny House Wire project or the divestment campaigns in the UK, or the work that 350 is doing, or the work that's happening with IEN to fight pipelines and projects in the US, we have to ensure that we're sending a signal to these foundations, to organizations and corporations that are offering funds to us, that yes, we want to work with you, and we're thankful for Aviva for recognizing our great project, for recognizing that this is an important part of the work that needs to get done, but that we have to do it with real responsibility, and that we also have a responsibility as folks on the ground to ensure that we're not taking money from these companies, and that we're standing in solidarity, and we're standing at the morals grounded in Indigenous rights and sovereignty of our communities, and that we're pushing for better tomorrow, not just for climate change stabilization, but for true climate justice, because true climate justice is about ensuring that all communities are protected, whether you're in the Bakken, whether you're in the coal fields, whether you're in downstream from tar sands, or even copper and gold and diamond mining. Indigenous rights need to be upheld, and we need to be paving a world for a better future for all. So I just want to thank everyone that's been on the call today, and thank everyone who's shown such tremendous support for ICA in turning down this money. It's been a really difficult decision, but it's also been really empowering for us to see such tremendous support from all of our allies and friends here in Canada and the United States and across the globe. So Masi Cho, hi. Thank you for everyone that's supported us. And I think that's it. And I also just wanted to send one more thank you out to Andrea, not Andrea, she's Andrea on our little live chat, but Marielle Sparks Cardinal, the comms person for Indigenous Climate Action, for helping us with all the technical stuff today and getting us onto Facebook Live, and all of the ICA staff, including Valine Priest, Anna Collins, Siku Alulu, and Andrea Bastian, who are across the country, because I couldn't have done any of this without you, as well as the ICA Steering Committee, who has given such tremendous guidance and provided such great wisdom to make this project come off the ground. So thank you to everyone that has been a part of this project. And again, I encourage you all to check out our crowdsource funding online. It's in the chat below. We are trying to raise money for a Indigenous media, climate change media project, so that we can get more voices of more community members up online and available, so we can have our Indigenous experts talking about what it means to have real climate action and strategies in this country. So thank you, Masicho.